Hello friends, welcome to the channel. In this video, you will learn React.js complete from beginner to advanced. So, if you want to learn React.js and take your JavaScript skills to another level, then stay until the end. Learning React is very simple. Many people find it difficult to learn React.js because they try to learn a lot of things, even the things that don't apply to them. So first of all, let's take a look at the list of things that you'll need to learn React. So first of all, you need to know how to create a new React app. Second, you need to know how to create a component in React. Third is display some HTML on the UI. Fourth is add some CSS to the UI to update it. Fifth is adding state to a React component. Sixth is creating a new React component. Seventh is passing props between React components. And eighth is calling an API within a React component. Ninth is on the list is saving the API data in a local state variable. And finally, the 10th and last thing is displaying the API data saved in the local state on the UI. You only need to know these 10 things to say that you know React. So if you're excited to learn React, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more cool projects and tutorials. And let's begin. So with our first step, we create a new React project using the yarn command, and we type the command yarn create React app, and we'll name our React app. So for this, I'm naming my app learn React. So now our React app has been scaffolded. Let's start coding. Let's go into the folder and open our code editor. Let's go to the app.js file. And first of all, let's start our server with yarn start. So this is how a new React project looks like. We can go to our app.js file and start editing this. So first of all, in React, a component is a file, lives in a file that starts with the capital letter and ends in .js or .ts. So .ts is for TypeScript. We are just using JavaScript. So our components will end with .js files. And the name could be anything given that it starts with a capital letter. Within this file, you define a component by declaring a function and exporting that function either as a default export or just as a non-default export, right? So this is how you create a component. Let's create some custom HTML to display on the UI. So our second thing is to display some UI. Let's display hello world, save. And this is how you display some custom HTML on the UI. Let's add a button, right? And let's call it increment. So this is our button and you can now click it. Cool. And let's also display a number. Let's say 1. Okay. Save it. So here is our number and this is our button. You can click it. So this is how you add HTML within a React component. If you know HTML, then within this return parenthesis, all you need to do is add all the HTML that you want and that will show up on screen. So this is our second thing. Now let's learn the third thing, which is adding CSS. So you can add CSS in a number of ways. For example, you can add an inline style object like this. And then you can do anything like, say, you can change the color. Let's say red. So this is how you apply inline styles. Now you can go to app.css, which is import it like this here in the app.js file, which means the styles you write in app.css file will be available and applied to all the components and markup here. So in app.css file, we already have a lot of boilerplate CSS. We can also write some custom for ourselves. For example, let's write some CSS for a button. So if you already know CSS, then this is just normal CSS, the way you would write in just HTML CSS files. So let's add some padding to our button. Let's say 1 EM and 2 EM. So now our button is bigger with some padding. Let's remove the border, so none. And let's change the background color of the button to be, let's say, this color. And then change the color to be white. Okay. And let's also add some border radius. So now our button has some border radius. And we can add a cursor pointer. So when you hover, the cursor changes, right? So now you can click the button, and we have added CSS in two different ways. One is using a CSS file, which is imported in a React component using the import keyword like this, and using inline styles like this. Right. So now you know how to add a custom UI to React app and style it using CSS, and of course creating a new React app. So we are done with the first 3 things. Now we are only remaining with the last 7 things. So let's go to the next one. The next one is adding state to a React component. Okay. So how do you do that? This React component is called a functional React component because we have defined it using a function keyword, right? So in a functional React component, we declare state using the useState hook. So the syntax for this is like this. In an array, you would create, you define 2 keywords. Okay. So first is the name of our state. I'll call it counter. And after a comma, the second thing in this array will be a function that can update this state, which I'll call set counter. You can name these things anything that you want, right? Now we need to define this using the useState hook. So type out useState and close it with the parenthesis. And then we need to import useState from React. And the way you do that is this syntax. So you are importing useState, which was exposed in the React package, which is installed in our project when we created it. Okay. So now we have added some local state to our React component. Now this is not enough because you need to do something with this state. And what you can do is add some data to it. So we can add some initial data to this counter variable. We can say that the initial value of the counter is 0. This value could be a string, it could be an object, it could be any valid JavaScript data type. Okay. So we have added a number 0. So initial value of counter will be 0. Understood? Clear? Okay. Now the next thing is displaying this value on the screen. So we can display our state value on the screen by using JavaScript within the markup. Okay. And the way you use JavaScript within the markup is by enclosing it within curly braces. So after you write curly braces in markup, within these curly braces, you can now write JavaScript. Okay. So here we'll refer our JavaScript variable called counter. So what it'll do is this will replace the value of counter within a markup. Let's save this. And now our counter is 0. Okay. Now what we want is, let's just verify this. We will change the value to 3. And now the value here is 3. Now in a React app, you want it to be dynamic, right? So this was our third thing. Now we'll look at updating the state variable. And the way you update a state variable is by using the function that you define, the second parameter here. So set counter will be used to update the variable. Okay. Now what we want is when the button increment is clicked, in that event, we'll need to increment the value of counter by 1. So let's create an on-click event handler, which you do in React with this syntax. And then here we'll need to write the code to update the counter variable. So we'll create an arrow function, and after in this arrow function we'll call setCounter, right? And here what we'll do is we'll just do counter plus 1. So whatever the existing value of counter, add 1 to it, and that will be the new value, right? Let's save this and try it out. So now our counter value is increasing, right? So our homework for you is to create another button called decrement, and you have to decrement the counter value by 1, okay? And another thing that you can do is create another button called add 5, and whenever that button is clicked you would need to add 5 to it. So let me do that here for you. You can do the decrement button as a homework, right? So we'll just add 5 to the counter and we'll call this button add 5. Let's save. When we click this, as you can see, 5 is added, and when we click increment, only 1 is added. Now our homework is to create a decrement button for yourself. So now you know how to create or add local state to a component. Cool. Now let's move on to the next thing. You'll now see how to create a new component. So let's define a new function. We'll call it my component. Okay, and close it like this. And this is our function. Now inside this function we'll return something, and that return will be some markup. Okay, and we'll call it my component like this, right? So this is how you define a new component. You can define a new component within its own file or within an existing file like app.js. Okay, so let's define this component within this file only. Now how to display this component on the screen, because right now it's not being displayed. So you need to embed this component within the app component, because that is the parent component of our app, entire app. So whichever component you need displayed on the screen, you need to embed it within the app component. And the way you do is just write that component as HTML markup in a self-closing tag like this. Let's save this. And now my component is displayed on the screen. Okay, so this is how you create a component within the same file. Let's see how you'll create a new component as a new file. So in your source folder, you can create a component at this level itself, or you can create a new components folder, and within that folder you can create a new component, name it anything you want, but it should start with a capital letter. And this is my component 2, and it should end in .js. Okay, so this is a new component file. We'll just copy this same code here, right? And we'll call it my component 2, and we'll call this my component 2, right? So this is a new component declared, but now we need to embed it within app component so that it's visible on the screen, because right now it's not. But one problem here is that my component was in the same file. That was why you could refer it in the same app component file. So first you need to bring my component within app.js. The way you do it is to export it from this file, and you use this syntax using two keywords, export and default. Okay, so now my component 2 is exported, and any other component can import this. So let's go to our app component and import our we can display my component 2 like this, and this is how you will import it. Import my component 2 and then give the relative path, which is component/my component 2. So this is how you create new components and embed child components in a parent component. A parent component is the one in which you are embedding other components, and a child component is the one that is being embedded in a parent component. Clear? Right. So now you know how to create new components. Let's pass props from parent component to a child component. Okay. So now what we want is we also want to display the counter in a child component. Okay. So counter is something. Now we want to access the counter variable within my component. And the way you do it is by passing it as a function parameter like you do in normal JavaScript functions. So we'll have counter here, right? Let's just say counter for now like this, okay? Now what we need to do is we need to pass this counter to my component, and the way you do is pass it as an attribute. Like you write attributes in normal HTML, you can write it custom attributes for your component in React like this, okay? And if I haven't already told you, this syntax is called not HTML but JSX, right? Okay, this is called JSX, and this is how we pass prop to a child component from a parent component. Now to access this, we need to destructure this like this. So within curly braces, you write down the parameter. If you don't want to destructure this, you can just call this props, okay? And then you can access it like you access it on an object via the dot syntax, like props dot counter. We'll add a check with the question mark. Don't worry about that. You can just access it with count dot as well, okay? So within my component, now you can see counter is 31. You have the value of counter within a child component. So this is how you pass props from parent to child by writing it as an attribute. Okay, cool. So now let's move on to the next thing. You've already learned so much, so be proud of yourself and don't leave this video right now, because what you are going to learn next is what will truly set you apart from most people and give you a true understanding of how to build applications. Okay, so the next thing is calling an API in React.js. So this is the main part that frontend does, is that it calls backend APIs to get some data and then display that data on the screen or do whatever with it. So to call an API, first of all, we'll need to create a new function. Let's say call API. You can call it anything, okay? I'll use arrow syntax to define this function. You can use the function keyword as well, right? Now within this API will define a response, okay? There are two syntax to call an API. One is using the .then syntax, then and catch blocks, and the other is using the async await. I prefer using async await because it is cleaner and results in more concise and compact code. So the way you define an async function is like this. And now you can call an API by awaiting on a fetch function. A fetch is a special function in React in which you can pass a URL and that URL will be called as an API. Okay. And you need to await on that because API calls are async. So you need to wait for that API call to end so that you can do something with it. So within this API, within this fetch function, now we need to pass some URL. Let's grab a demo API. We'll call it random user API. We'll search for it. This is an API that gives you a random user. Okay. So how do you call this API? We need this endpoint. Okay. This endpoint. So we'll just paste this here. So this will call our API. Now this API will return some data, but we need to convert this data into JSON. Okay. So the way we do it is we await on response.json. So this will convert the API data into JSON object and store it in the data variable. Let's just console log this data variable to see how it is called. Okay. Now we have defined a function that calls an API, but we need to call this function from somewhere. Okay. So we can call it on a button click, but many times in a React app, you need to call the API by itself without any user action. So to do that, we make use of another React hook called the useEffect hook, and we import it like this, and we'll use it like this. So within the use React hook, we create an arrow function as the first parameter, and the second parameter will be an empty array. This empty array means this useEffect hook will be only run once in the entire application, and that once is when the application is rendered for the very first time. Okay, so within this useEffect hook, all we need to do is call API. Call the call API function like this. So now our call API function will run. Let's go to our console, and here we see our object logged. Okay, so this is our user object that we got from calling the API, right? So now you have learned how to call an API in React. Be proud of yourself. Let's move on to the next part. After you have called an API and you have that data, you want to store it in a local state variable, because that's how you will be able to use it across your rest of the React application. To do that, we define a new React state variable. We'll call it, let's say, user. In this case, you can name it anything, and the function to update it, set user. And this is again defined using the useState hook. This is how you define a state variable. Now, user will not be a number, but it will be an object. So the initial state will just keep it an empty object. Now, when we have data, we want to set user to this data. Okay. So now user will be set to this data. So next thing we want to do is display the state data from an API on the UI. Okay, this is the final thing. So let's copy the state variable and just display it here. Let's do that here. User. Okay. Now note that user is an object. You cannot display objects. You would need to display some detail, some particular key. Okay. So let's grab some key. Okay. So user is an array which has only one value. Okay, so instead of accessing that there, we can just access that here as well. So we can do data dot results of 0, and we'll store this value in our user. Okay, this is an error because you cannot display object on the screen. So we need to display some particular value of the user. So let's display the name, or let's say the email. Okay. So here we'll do user dot email. Okay. So now the user's email is displayed on the screen. You can display other details as well, like let's say gender. Okay, and let's say phone. Okay, and let's also display the user's picture, profile picture. So to display a profile picture, we'll create an image tag, and just like in HTML, you just need to just like in HTML, you just need to create a source and pass a URL. Now in this case, the URL should come from the user state variable. So we'll wrap the source in curly braces, which means we can write some JavaScript, and we'll do user dot picture because that is the key, and within that we need to grab the large. Okay, so we'll do dot large and save. So we have our user picture as well on the screen, right? So this is how you call an API, save the data in a set variable and display it on the screen. Now one thing to note here is that, let's refresh. Okay, so this might work, but sometimes your React application might fail because the user object is empty. Okay, so you need to be sure that the user object is present, and if it's not present, you need to handle that empty state. So let's write some code for that. We'll write some JavaScript within curly braces to check for that. Okay, so what we want to check is user.email is present. Okay, so we'll check that this string's length is greater than 0, which means email is present, and email is present means user has some value and is not empty. So we'll use a ternary operator in JavaScript. If the user is not present, we'll just render an empty string. And if a user is present, we'll create a parent div and render this div. Okay. And within this div, we'll just copy the entire thing and paste it here. Okay. Right. So now, if there is some error, then our React application will not break. Another thing you need to do is display loading states on your screen while the API is being called and data is being loaded. You need to show some loading state, okay, like a spinner or some text. We'll display some loading text. To do that, we need to create a new state variable. So let's copy paste this. We'll call it loading and we'll call this set loading. Now loading will be initially false because it needs to be a boolean. Okay. Now as soon as our function is called, set call API will set loading to true. This means right now loading should be displayed. And after the API call is complete, we'll set loading to false, right? Which means loading is complete and now user can be displayed and loading spinner can be hidden, right? So here we'll write some more JavaScript within curly braces. We'll check for the loading state variable in a ternary operator. So if it is false, we'll just display the user. And in this case, we can just do nothing. Okay. Or we can even do we can create empty tags. So this is how you create empty tags in React when you don't want some markup. And we'll just copy this entire thing and paste it here like this. Okay. And when loading is true, we want to display loading text. So within quotes, we'll do loading. Okay. Right. So let's refresh this and you'll see loading text here. Right. So while the user loads, we see the loading text. Cool. So now you know how to create loading states. I'll also teach you, so far you have already learned React. Okay, so now you can say that you know React. You can create new React apps, components, new components, embed components, add state, pass props, call an API, and display the API result on the screen using the state. Okay, so you know React now, but now you can do other things as well. So for example, you can do exception handling in React, and you do that like in JavaScript with the try catch blocks. Okay, so when there is an error, we'll just log error to the console and we'll move our entire code block within the try block. Okay, so exception handling is complete. Okay, now one more thing you can do is that loading is set to true before the try block is called. So whenever there is an error, it will just jump to the catch and exit. So loading will never be set to false in this case. So we want that, doesn't matter if the API call succeeds or fails, loading will be always set to false after the API call ends anyhow. So we'll create a finally block, and within this finally block, we'll set loading to false. So this means whenever this function ends, doesn't matter if in success or failure, loading will be set to false. Okay, so this is how you do exception handling within React functions, and this is how you call a function and within a useEffect hook. Okay, and so this is basically a React app. You can add styles as well. So for example, you can add some styles to an image, give it some border radius, right? And another way to add styles, let me just show you one last thing, is you can add a class. You can add a class to your tag, And the way you add class to a tag in React is using the className keyword. You cannot use the class keyword like you do in HTML because class is a keyword in JavaScript for defining JavaScript classes. Okay, so that's why you need to use a different one called className, and you can give it any class name. Let's say my image. You can call it anything, and then you can refer it within your CSS like this as a class and give it anything, right? So let's, instead of this, let's give a class to the parent div. We'll call it user. And now within our CSS, we can access that class like this, and we'll give it a border. Let's say 1px solid gray. And now our card user has a border. Let's give it a width of 200px, maybe 400, right? And let's say margin 0 auto to center it. And let's also give it a background color. Beige, and give it some padding. Okay, so this looks nice. Okay, so this is how these are three ways to style. One is inline style, second the CSS file using tags, and third adding classes to your React tags and styling them in the React file. And you know how to add buttons, respond to events. There are many events in React. For example, we use the on click. Here you can also access other events, like within an input tag you can create an on change event like this, and then within the callback function you can do whatever you want. Okay, so let's create an input tag to store some value. We'll call it value and set value. Initially this will be an empty string. Okay, now here the input must be hooked to our state variable. Okay, so we'll set the value of this input to be the value state variable, and whenever a user types in, the on change event will be fired and will set the value. Okay, so we need to get the event as a parameter, and we'll set the event dot target dot value to value. So now you can type anything in this and the value will be set. And you can verify this by creating a p tag and passing the value here. Okay, so now when you type something, let's say Coca-Cola, you can see the value displayed here. So this is how you create an input tag in React and make it a controlled input. A controlled input is nothing but an input which is hooked to React state. Okay, so this was entire React. Now you can proudly say that you know React. All you need to do next is create React projects and practice building different kinds of projects. And you don't need to go anywhere, because on our channel we have a lot of React projects. You can build a Naruto database app, you can build a Wikipedia clone with React, you can even build a QR code generator. Okay, you can even build a Pokemon app. So you can practice building all these apps now that you know basic React. So this was all for this video. If you like, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you would like to learn next. And this is it. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.